The Mustang was agonizing, tied to the tree, barbed wire cutting its legs for hours. Arthur Sullivan sped up his Porsche, intending to drive past. Animal problems didn't pay his bills. But when he saw the old wooden gate and the mountains in the background, he slammed on the brakes. What happened next, no one expected. Subscribe to the channel and comment below what city you're watching from. Do you believe in second chances, even after 60? The story begins now. Arthur Sullivan fired people like other men changed clothes, coldly, without haste, without remorse. That Tuesday morning, 3 employees were gone before his coffee got cold. 20 years with the company, young children, overdue mortgage, irrelevant details he no longer even heard. At 61, Arthur owned $85 million in assets and lived by a simple philosophy. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. Compassion is a luxury for the poor. The kind of success that impresses in business magazines. The kind that impresses no one at 3 a.m. when the silence of an empty mansion echoes like an abandoned cathedral. His secretary was crying in the hallway. Arthur closed the door without looking back. He had a meeting in 3 hours at a ranch in rural Wyoming. More land to buy, more families to displace, more money to accumulate. He grabbed his Porsche keys and headed for the road. The tire blew exactly where it shouldn't have. A dirt road, the middle of nowhere, no cell signal. Arthur grunted in irritation, loosened his Italian silk tie worth $1,000 and started searching for reception, stepping in the red mud with shoes that cost more than his former employees' monthly salaries. That's when he heard it. A whinny, high-pitched, desperate. It came from the nearby woods, cutting through the afternoon silence like a blade through silk. Arthur stopped, turned his head towards the sound. For a second, just 1 second, something stirred deep in his chest. Something he was sure he had killed long ago. He shook his head, annoyed with himself. He didn't have time for this. He continued looking for a signal on his phone, but the whinnies didn't stop. They grew weaker, more distressed. Damn it! Arthur dropped the phone on the hood and followed the sound, muttering under his breath. He just wanted silence to make his calls, nothing more. He pushed through branches, cursed when thorns ripped his silk shirt until he saw it. The Mustang was tied to the tree with barbed wire. Brown coat, a white patch on its chest like an irregular star. Around 8 years old from its features, wild from head to hoof. That was obvious from the tense muscles, the terror in its dark eyes, the way it struggled against the restraints that only cut deeper with each movement. Its front legs bled where the wire had cut. The animal had been agonizing there for hours, perhaps since dawn. Whoever did this knew it would be a slow, brutal death. Arthur stood still, watching. The horse saw him and struggled harder, whinnies escaping its throat like silent screams for help. Fresh blood flowed from its left leg. It wasn't his problem, a wild horse, land that wasn't his, a situation he hadn't created. Arthur turned to leave. He stopped again. He looked at the mountains in the background, the old, half-collapsed wooden gate, the smell of wet earth after the morning rain, something about that place. He shook his head hard. Nonsense, stupid sentimentality. At 61, he had no time for kindness. Kindness was a thing of the past, a thing of who he used to be before he learned that the world has no pity for anyone. But as he started to walk away again, he heard the low moan of the injured animal, a sound that wasn't a whinny. It was pure pain, despair. Arthur Sullivan hadn't saved anyone in 18 years. That day, for the first time since then, he took off his expensive jacket and walked towards the barbed wire. Untangling barbed wire with bare hands is a foolishness that only those who have never tried imagine is easy. Arthur discovered this when the metal cut his right palm on the very first attempt. His blood mixed with the horse's blood on the muddy ground. The Mustang struggled violently as Arthur approached. Eyes wide, nostrils flared, muscles trembling with terror and exhaustion. It had never trusted a human being. That was crystal clear in every fiber of its wild body. At least in that, he and Arthur had something in common. It took 40 minutes to free the animal, 40 minutes of patience that Arthur didn't know he still possessed, whispering words he hadn't used in decades, while his expensive clothes turned into bloody rags. When the last piece of wire came loose, the horse stumbled, almost falling. Its injured legs barely supported its weight. Arthur backed away, expecting the animal to bolt. Instead, the Mustang stood still, panting, looking at him with something that wasn't gratitude. Wild horses don't know human gratitude, but a primitive confusion, as if it didn't understand why this two-legged predator hadn't attacked. Arthur wiped the blood from his hands on his ruined shirt. Mission accomplished. Clear conscience. Now he could go back to his business without that nuisance hammering in his head. But when he reached his car, the engine wouldn't start. Dead battery. Perfect. The nearest mechanic was in town, 10 miles down the dirt road. The tow truck would arrive in at least 2 hours. Arthur cursed under his breath, kicked the flat tire, and went back to check on the horse. The animal was still in the same spot, now lying down, licking its wounds. Its breathing was rapid, its legs trembling. It was clearly in shock. It needed a vet urgently, or it wouldn't make it through the night. It wasn't his problem. It wasn't. But when the tow truck finally arrived, Arthur had already called 3 veterinarians. The first one, who handled animal emergencies, agreed to meet them at a makeshift clinic on the outskirts of town. Dr. Henry Peterson was the kind of vet who looked more like a rancher. Unshaven, simple clothes, huge hands, surprisingly delicate with injured animals. He examined the Mustang carefully while Arthur waited outside, annoyed with himself for wasting time. "Wild horse," Dr. Peterson confirmed, emerging from the makeshift surgery room an hour later. "About 8 years old, by the wear on its teeth. Never been broken. The wounds are deep, but he'll survive." "Great. How much?" $400 for the treatment, but he'll need care for at least 2 weeks. Do you have a place to keep him?" Arthur didn't want to. He wanted to resolve this and move on with his life. "Where did he come from?" Dr. Peterson scratched his beard. "By the markings and behavior, I'd say he was born on the lands of the old Whitestone Ranch. There are still wild Mustangs there, descendants of those protected by old Joseph." The world stopped. Whitestone Ranch. Arthur hadn't heard that name in 18 years. Not since the funeral, not since he swore never to return to that cursed place where everything had fallen apart. When the veterinarian mentioned the name Joseph Sullivan, his father, something clicked in Arthur's chest like a bone breaking. This wasn't just any rescue. It was a bill the past had come back to collect. Whitestone Ranch. 18 years without hearing that name. 18 years pretending that place didn't exist, that it had never mattered, that it hadn't left scars that still bled in silence. Arthur paid the vet bill in cash, like someone buying silence. But Dr. Peterson kept talking about Joseph, about the Mustangs the old man protected until he died, about the lands that were sold after the funeral. Sold by Arthur, for 1/3 of the market value, out of desperation to get out of there and never return. This is where things get ugly, because memory has a life of its own, and when it decides to attack, it doesn't ask permission. Joseph Sullivan died alone on a Sunday morning. A sudden heart attack at 67 in the ranch yard, scattering feed for the wild horses that had sought shelter on the property for decades. A neighbor found him 3 days later, his body already stiff, surrounded by Mustangs who didn't dare approach. Arthur learned of the death by phone. He was in New York City, closing a $10 million deal. When the call came, he hung up and continued the meeting. He closed the deal, celebrated with French champagne. It wasn't until the early hours, when he arrived at his empty apartment, that he let the news sink in. His father had died, alone, waiting for a son who never came back. The funeral was awkward. half a dozen neighbors, a priest who barely knew the deceased, and Arthur in a very expensive black suit, standing by the coffin like an ice statue. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He signed the inheritance papers and put everything up for sale that same week. The ranch was worth $2 million. Arthur sold it for $700,000 to the first interested party, just to never have to go back there. He took the money and left. End of story. Or so it should have been. But now he was back in that cursed place because of a wild Mustang that might be a descendant of the horses his father fed every morning. Horses Joseph treated like family because he had no real family left. Dr. Peterson watched him with curiosity. "Did you know old Joseph?" "No," Arthur lied. "I just heard about him. Extraordinary man. He spent the last 20 years of his life caring for those Mustangs. He said that as long as they lived on his land, his son would always have a reason to come home." The lie hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. That night, in a cheap motel room in town, Arthur found the letter. It had been in his wallet for 18 years, folded and yellowed, written in his father's trembling hand a few months before he died. Arthur had never opened it. He knew he couldn't bear to read it. He opened it that night. "My son, I still feed the Mustangs in the valley every morning. It's my way of praying for you. As long as they are here, a part of you is here too. When you come back, and I know you will someday, they will be waiting. Just like me, with eternal love, your father who never gave up, Joseph." Arthur Sullivan hadn't cried in 23 years. 23 years. That night, alone in a dirty hotel room, with his father's letter trembling in his bloody hands, he discovered that he still could. And he finally understood that the injured Mustang was no coincidence. It was the last message from a father who died waiting for the son who never came home. The next morning brought 3 calls from angry partners and a decision that would cost $12 million. Arthur was supposed to be in a meeting in New York City at 9 a.m. It was the deal of the year, the acquisition of a soybean processing plant that would triple his profits. Contracts signed, investors waiting, future guaranteed. All he had to do was show up, smile, and sign the paper. Instead, he was standing in a makeshift veterinary clinic watching a wild Mustang that could barely stand. The horse had spent the night in critical condition. Dr. Peterson had administered antibiotics, cleaned the wounds, and dressed them. But the trauma was deep, not just physical. The animal refused water, refused food, stayed in the corner of the stall like a cornered beast waiting for the next attack. "He'll need constant care for the next few days," the vet explained. "Someone to stay close, to earn his trust. Otherwise, he could fall into a deep depression." Arthur had 15 employees to do that kind of thing. He had money to hire the best veterinarians in the country. He had resources that 99% of the population would never dream of having. He didn't have time. His cell phone rang again. Bernard Hayes, his partner of 15 years, his voice agitated. "Arthur, where the hell are you? The Japanese are here, the contracts are on the table, and you just vanished." Arthur looked at the Mustang. The animal watched him with deep eyes, still suspicious, but without the wild terror of the previous day. There was something in that gaze that moved him in a way he couldn't explain. "Cancel the meeting," Arthur said. "What? Have you lost your mind? It's $12 million, man." "I said cancel it." He hung up before Bernard could protest. That decision cost $12 million. For the first time in his life, Arthur didn't care about the price. He spent the entire day at the clinic, watching, waiting. The Mustang approached slowly, sniffed his hand, retreated. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. A primitive dance between 2 creatures who had forgotten how to trust. Arthur named the animal Stone, not out of sentimentality, at least that's what he told himself, but because he needed a name for the veterinary reports. A practical name. Functional. A lie. He chose Stone because it was half the name of the ranch where everything had begun, Whitestone, the place where a version of him still existed, capable of loving something. Late in the afternoon, something changed. Stone accepted water from his hand, just a few sips, but it was the first sign that he wanted to live, the first sign that he trusted him. Arthur felt something crumbling inside his chest, a wall built brick by brick for 18 years, cracking like an old wall under the weight of time. That night, in the same hotel room, he reread his father's letter. As long as they are here, a part of you is here too. He understood then that he wasn't saving a horse. He was trying to save the part of himself he had buried with Joseph. The part that still believed love was worth more than money. The part his father had never given up on finding. It was too late to ask his father for forgiveness, but perhaps it wasn't too late to honor his memory, even if it cost him everything he had built on the ruins of his own soul. 3 weeks later, Arthur Sullivan was unrecognizable. Not just on the outside, although Italian suits had given way to simple clothes, and his Rolex worth $50,000 had been forgotten in a drawer. But on the inside, where ice once resided, something he had forgotten how to name was now growing. Stone was recovering quickly. The wounds healed cleanly, the animal gained weight, and primitive suspicion gave way to curious caution. The Mustang followed him with its eyes as he moved around the makeshift stall Arthur had built behind the clinic. It still didn't allow touch. Perhaps it never would, being wild at heart, but it accepted his presence. It was more than anyone had gotten from Arthur in the last 18 years. The first to confront him was Bernard Hayes. He appeared on a Thursday, dark suit, a funeral expression, carrying partnership dissolution papers. "You've completely lost your mind," he said, throwing the documents on the table. 15 years of partnership thrown away because of an animal. Arthur didn't even lift his eyes from the veterinary reports he was reviewing. "It's not because of the animal." "Then what is it? A midlife crisis? Depression? Because there's treatment for that, and it doesn't involve destroying an empire." Bernard wouldn't understand. How could he? For him, as for Arthur himself for decades, success was measured in numbers. Power was measured in properties. Life was measured in how much you could accumulate before you died. "Dissolve the partnership," Arthur said, signing the papers without reading them. "You keep your share. I'll keep mine." Bernard slammed the door as he left. He took with him 15 years of a friendship that had never been true friendship. Just financial convenience disguised as loyalty. But not all breakups were like that. Brenda Adams, the woman who had cleaned his offices for a decade, showed up the following Saturday, not to argue, to thank him. Arthur had deposited $50,000 into her account the previous week, without explanation, without conditions. It was enough money for her to buy the house she had dreamed of since her husband died. "Why, Mr. Sullivan?" she asked, tears in her eyes. Arthur thought about the answer. The real answer was that he was trying to wash 18 years of grime from his soul with gestures that could never compensate for all the harm he had done. But he didn't say that. "Because you deserve it," was all he managed to say. "Redemption isn't about being forgiven. It's about doing things differently, even knowing that it might never be enough." The list was long. Employees he had unjustly fired, families he had evicted, small business owners he had crushed. Arthur began to seek each one out, carrying checks that couldn't undo the past, but perhaps could ease the present. Not everyone accepted. Sarah Miller, whose bakery he had destroyed by buying up the entire block for speculation, threw the envelope on the floor and spit on his shoes. "Money won't bring my husband back," she said. Her husband had suffered a heart attack 3 months after losing the family business. Arthur didn't argue. He picked up the envelope from the floor and left. Some wounds don't heal. Some pardons don't come. It was part of the price of having lived like a demon for decades. But for the first time in 18 years, when he woke up in the morning, he didn't taste the bitterness of his own life in his mouth. It was a start. Small, perhaps insignificant to the rest of the world, but real. And Stone was there to witness every step of this journey back to lost humanity. 2 years passed like slowly turned pages. Arthur was 63 now, his hair whiter, deeper lines around eyes that had relearned how to smile. Not the calculated smile of a businessman, but something genuine that was born from the ashes of the person he used to be. Stone turned 10. In the wild, a Mustang might have another 7 or 8 years ahead. In the loving captivity Arthur had created at the old Whitestone Ranch, yes, he had bought the land back for 3 times what he sold it for. The animal could live up to 20. Arthur understood the feeling of time running out. At 63, he knew he was closer to the end than the beginning. But for the first time, he didn't fear the passing years. He was sure that when his time came, he wouldn't die as he had lived for 50 years, alone and empty. The sanctuary he built now housed 15 wild Mustangs, all rescued from critical situations. Arthur didn't break them. He respected their wild nature. He simply offered land, clean water, veterinary care, and protection from human predators. Dr. Peterson had become more than a vet. He was the sanctuary administrator, a true friend, the first person in decades who knew Arthur completely, including the broken pieces. "Your father would be proud," he said one afternoon, as they watched Stone graze freely in the field where Joseph used to scatter feed. Arthur didn't answer immediately. He looked at the mountains in the background, the same ones he had avoided for 18 years, now painted gold by the late afternoon sun. I don't know if proud is the right word, maybe relieved to know that there was still something salvageable in me. Funny how we only realize the obvious when it's too late. Arthur had spent decades chasing approval in the wrong places, partners, competitors, business magazines, when the only approval that mattered was in a yellowed letter, written in the trembling hand of a father who had never given up. The foundation was thriving, not just the sanctuary, but the social projects Arthur had created. Scholarships for children of small farmers, microcredit for those who had lost everything in agribusiness, a protection program for wild animals across the state. None of this brought back the lost years with his father. Nothing erased the image of Joseph dying alone, surrounded only by the horses he protected. But it meant that the old man's death had not been in vain. One afternoon, Arthur found the last letter. It was in a box stored in the attic of what had been Joseph's house, a house he now inhabited, simple and functional, so different from the empty mansion he had owned in New York City. The letter was from 2006, a year before his father's death, addressed to him but never sent. "My dear son, I know you hate me. I know you blame our simple life for not giving you everything you wanted. But I want you to know that I never regretted anything except not being able to teach you that being rich isn't about having a lot of money. It's about having a lot of love, and I was always a millionaire in love for you. Even now, even with everything that has happened between us, I still see the good boy we raised here on this land. One day you will come home, and when you do, you will understand that you never left my heart. With eternal love, Dad." That night, Arthur cried for the last time for the lost years. The next morning, he woke up at peace with the man he had become. Stone whinnied in the pasture, calling him to another day of simple, true life. 5 years after the rescue, on a Sunday morning just like the one Joseph had left, Arthur walked through the pasture carrying the bucket of feed. At 66, his movements were slower but firm. Stone, now 13, approached as he did every morning, not domesticated, he never would be, but confident. The Mustang ate from the hand that had once freed him from the barbed wire, and Arthur saw in those wild eyes the reflection of his own journey. It was the anniversary of Joseph's death. 18 years earlier, in that same pasture, a good man had passed away alone. Today, over 100 people would gather to celebrate his memory at the annual Joseph Sullivan Foundation Festival. Families who received homes, young people who earned scholarships, rural producers who managed to start over with microcredit help. People who had never known the old man, but who lived better because his son had finally understood the lesson. Dr. Peterson arrived early, bringing the pastor who would celebrate the outdoor mass and 3 journalists interested in telling the sanctuary's story. Arthur avoided interviews, not out of modesty, but because he knew his transformation was not a model for anyone. Every man needs to find his own wild horse, his own wound that teaches compassion. "How many Mustangs do we have now?" one of the journalists asked, filming Stone grazing freely. 23, Arthur replied. "But it's not about the numbers, it's about giving a second chance to those life has hurt." The woman didn't understand that he wasn't just talking about the horses. Late in the afternoon, when the visitors had left and the pasture returned to silence, Arthur was alone with Stone. The animal lay down on the grass, breathing heavily but peacefully. 13 was a respectable age for a Mustang, and both knew that time was a borrowed gift. Arthur knelt beside the horse, resting his hand on its furry neck. Stone didn't move, a sign of absolute trust that had taken years to build. "You saved me, old boy," Arthur whispered. "I don't know how, I don't know why, but you brought me home." The Mustang snorted softly as if in agreement. When night fell, Arthur returned to the simple house where he now lived. On the kitchen table, he left a handwritten letter. Not a will, that was already done, but something more important. Instructions for Dr. Peterson about the sanctuary's future. Names of people who could help, and a specific request. When Stone passed, he should be buried in the same pasture where Joseph had died. A circle closed. Father and son reunited through a wild Mustang that had taught him that redemption never comes easy, but always comes to those brave enough to accept that they need to change. There is no happy ending. There is an honest ending. And this was his. Arthur turned off the lights and went to sleep. For the first time in decades, he didn't dream of money, power, or success. He dreamed of a boy running freely in a pasture, followed by wild horses and the proud laughter of a father who had never given up. Outside, Stone slept under the stars, free as he was born to be, protected as he deserved to live. And somewhere beyond the mountains, Joseph finally rested in peace, knowing that his son had come home. "I can't go back and be the son I should have been, but I can be different today and tomorrow. And for the time I have left, Joseph believed in second chances. Stone gave me mine. Now, it's my turn to pass it on." This story is about regret, about words we didn't say, calls we didn't make, people we left behind while chasing things that don't matter. If you have someone you love but are distant from out of pride, out of anger, out of being too busy, don't wait until you need a wild horse to teach you what truly matters. Call, write, show up, because unlike Arthur, you still have time. And if this story reminded you of someone, or if you believe in second chances, share it. We never know who needs to hear this today. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.